little conflicted knowing what Roy Jenkins was intending in the early 80s. Like mixed loyalties between past Labour family and a potentially new one with the SDP. And we also, I think, tied up the feeling of devastation after the 1979 referendum. So I think we're looking forward now towards
a new party. And it was now around March 1981. It was clear that March was going to be the date for the launch of the new party, which was launched by Jenkins and the Gang of Four, and in Wales it was launched by Roy and Tom Ellis, because I wasn't at that moment in time an actual member, because the Gower thing was coming to its final conclusion. In the Gower selection conference I mentioned the word social democracy. Well, that was a clear hint, wasn't it? And that's that. Shirley Williams came to speak in Swansea University around the same time, and I spoke with Shirley and said about the dual situation I was confronted with at the time, and she gave me a bit of advice, and I pursued that. And eventually, after, say, 6-8 weeks, April, May time, I then joined formally and started being involved with a steering committee. They had set up a steering committee, and there was a gentleman who was a lawyer in Cardiff, Tony Jeremy, who effectively organised things for a while, and he did a very, very good job. And Tony, I knew his heart was in the right place, particularly on the importance of having a Welsh base to the party. And within it, there was a steering committee which was unelected. Then we had a steering committee. Tom wanted one for North Wales, so there was a North Wales committee, South Wales committee. Then we decided, well, we better do some democratic base to all this. So they asked myself and a man from Wrexham, a legal person again, Eric Owen, to devise a constitution. And that was devised, and it was agreed. So then there came a base where we would elect people to a proper SDP committee for Wales. Now we had to send all that, the constitution, the fact that there was going to be a committee for Wales, to London, to Cowley Street. They weren't too happy about it, because they had this vision of a central party. They all came from the Labour Party, didn't they? Same sort of principle. But Tom and I were very strong on the view, there's no way we're going back to those days. This is going to have a federal structure. And luckily, the Scots felt the same, and even parts of England felt the same. And the Lib Dems, when it eventually became the Lib Dems, has a federal structure. The SDP had a federal structure. We could design our own policies, have our own conferences, and we had a couple of consultative conferences, to cut a short story, because it was a hectic time. We had a couple of consultative conferences where Roy Jenkins and Owen and Shirley and those came to. But about just before 1983 general election, we decided, right, we're going to have votes. This conference is no longer going to be consultative. It's going to be a policy-making conference. Now, we met great opposition there, because I remember telling David Owen that we were having this conference and we'll be voting. And he looked at me and he said, voting? Yes, we're going to have votes, because there's no point with having a consultation conference. These people in Wales work hard, 300-400 people in a conference. And it was very exciting days. The growth in the party was phenomenal. We've only got to look at the opinion polls at the time. Before the Falklands War, the SDP was at 51%. It was winning by-elections, winning local government by-elections, and I am to this day convinced Maggie Thatcher was third in the opinion polls. And I'm a great conspiracy theorist, man, on all sorts of things. The British establishment has done that throughout the centuries, going back centuries and centuries. The Falklands War need not have happened, but it was the war that saved Mrs. Thatcher. And it sunk us. Not only did she sink the Gwynoro, she also sunk the SDP in a way, because from 51% in the opinion polls, we came down now to being a normal third party. 20%, 25%, still doing well, but the big threat had gone. And Labour, I suppose, were also relieved about that, even though we did terrible damage to Labour for best part of 8 years. The 83 election and the 87 election. We stopped Labour in its tracks. And I claim to this day again that Labour only changed eventually because the SDP and the Liberal Democrats made it change. Because we made it a moderate Labour Party. Because they could not carry on with the kamikaze left-wing approach in the mid-80s, when there was a moderate alternative of known senior Labour politicians who were presenting a far more coherent, middle-of-the-way, moderate approach. So Labour realised, and Kinnock realised, that's why he changed. He didn't change for the love of it. He could not change from being anti-NATO, anti-nuclear, anti-Europe, anti-anything you can imagine, anti the House of Lords. This was Neil Kinnock. Eventually sorted out the militants. And he was the original militant. Long before Derek Hatton and the other people and the Liverpool militants, Neil was the militant of the 70s. And he had his own gang of people in Wales who were with him. One or two of them ended up in the Welsh Assembly eventually and became ministers and behaved in a totally different way then. And he eventually learned and he changed gradually. So, where did he end up? In Europe, commissioner. Not only himself, also his children ended up with senior jobs there. Who else ended up there? His wife ended up there. Where are both of them now? In the House of Lords? It's farcical. It is farcical that people give credit to this guy for anything. He's a charlatan of the worst order I've ever come across. But he had a great gift of oratory. And I suppose he did fight the left in the Labour Party. I'm going to give him credit for that. But he didn't do it. He had to do it. The SDP forced them to do it. Otherwise they would have been annihilated. Because our original role, I used to say it in speeches, our job was to replace Labour, defeat the Tories and be in government. That was my slogan all the time. Replace Labour, defeat the Tories and be in government. And Labour knew, and hence of course the story went on later, did it? John Smith, Blair, and eventually by the 90s there was an SDP Mark II. Blair, John Smith, and there were some in Wales who didn't join the SDP in the 80s, who should have. That's where their heart was. Credwyn Hughes was SDP. Credwyn was a close friend of Roy Jenkins. He was one of the Jenkinsites. When we were planning XYZ back in the 70s, he was there. He was one of them. But careful, you see, a very careful man, very judicious man. And, let's hold all the balls in the air. That was Credwyn. Great respect for Credwyn, but he wasn't a decisive enough man. Because if he had come over, for instance, in Wales, that would have made an enormous difference. And I could think of other MPs, but the most important one was him. And Dyfed Hudson-Davies came over, the MP for Caerphilly, Geoffrey Thomas, Abertillery, joined the SDP. So there were three of them, Tom, Geoffrey and then Dyfed. But to go back now, we're still about 82, 83. Now there was the Liberals. And there was an election pending. And we had to share the seats.